My name is Novalee Carter. I'm 36 years old, a federal judge, and until that morning, my family thought I was a paralegal somewhere in Oregon. They never asked. They never cared enough to ask. That day, I sat quietly in the back of a high-ceiling courtroom in Raleigh, North Carolina. It smelled of varnished wood and stale coffee, and every footstep echoed like it belonged to someone more important than me. The prosecution team was preparing their case. My parents were seated in the front row, straight-backed, whispering confidently about how Brenna's sister would beat this, that it was all just a technical misunderstanding, that their golden girl would come out untarnished again. They didn't know I was even in the room. They didn't see me when I passed through security or when I walked in behind a group of junior reporters. I wore a plain charcoal suit and kept my head down, blending in like I always had. The trial began, and within an hour it was already falling apart. Not for Brenna, for the court. Jurisdictional complications, federal implications, cross-state financial fraud that exceeded the authority of the presiding judge. A quiet conversation behind the bench, a recess, then the moment. Judge Maxwell Lowe cleared his throat, voice suddenly subdued. "This court is no longer able to proceed under current jurisdiction," he said. "We are requesting immediate assistance." He turned and looked straight at me. "Judge Carter," he said, "would you please take the bench?" I stood. Every eye followed. My mother gasped. My father blinked like he'd seen a ghost. Brenna's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, calm as glass. And just like that, the daughter they once called invisible walked to the front of the courtroom, past the headlines, past the lies, past everything they thought they knew, and took her rightful place. Before you hear the whole story behind that moment, if you've ever been abandoned, hurt by your own family, and still forced to smile through it, leave a comment. I'm not telling this to complain, but because maybe somewhere you felt what I felt. Now, let me take you back to where it all truly began. I was 12 the first time I understood I was invisible. It was the spring of Brenna's senior year. She had just won the Governor's Scholar Award, something rare and prestigious, and my parents threw her a backyard party like she'd just cured cancer. Balloons, catering, string lights, they even rented a white tent in case it rained. That same week, I had won a regional speech competition for middle school debate. I printed my certificate myself and taped it to the fridge just above the grocery list. The next morning, it was gone. My mother had replaced it with a brunch invitation for Brenna's celebration. When I asked about it, she didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, honey," she said, "that's lovely, but Brenna's achievement is a state-level honor. Let's not confuse things." That was always the way of it. Brenna sparkled, and I was expected to stay dim. She was louder, shinier, and easier to understand, the kind of daughter who looked like a future headline, while I, awkward, observant, too quiet, was always in the wrong light. I read books about constitutional law before bed and made flowcharts to relax. Once, in 8th grade, I tried explaining the concept of judicial precedent at dinner. My dad laughed and asked if I was going to start charging people for unsolicited lectures. Brenna giggled and said, "God, Novalee, can you even hear yourself?" They never saw it, but I stopped talking much after that. In high school, Brenna became a national name in high school startups. She created an app that tracked campus waste reduction and somehow turned it into a TEDx talk and 3 scholarships. I joined the school's mock trial team and captained it by junior year. We went undefeated. Not a single dinner conversation acknowledged it. My only sanctuary was in room 214, Mr. Aldridge's classroom. He taught U.S. government with a kind of reverence, like the Constitution was sacred text and logic was a form of prayer. One afternoon, after I stayed behind to clean the whiteboard, he looked at me and said, "You think like a litigator, Novalee, not because you're loud, but because you notice everything no one else does." He gave me a dog-eared copy of Gideon's Trumpet. I read it in 2 nights and didn't stop dreaming after that. College was my escape hatch. I earned a full scholarship to UNC Chapel Hill and never looked back. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I didn't tell them I was applying to Yale Law. When the acceptance letter came, I folded it into my journal and went for a walk in the rain. I wanted to scream to celebrate, but there was no one to tell. Gwen, my roommate, was the first person who actually said the words out loud. "You're brilliant," she told me, staring at the whiteboard I'd filled with case summaries. "It's terrifying, but also, I don't know, kind of beautiful." We became inseparable. I told her everything about Brenna, the parties, the silences. She listened like it mattered, and that in itself changed everything. Law school was brutal, but I thrived in the quiet. Clerkships came. A federal internship in D.C. led to a discreet appointment as a circuit-level judge in a specialized interstate fraud division by 34. My name wasn't public. My court didn't release photographs. The work was confidential, sensitive enough that even some friends didn't know the full scope. That suited me because back in Charlotte, my family still thought I worked as a legal researcher. My mother once described it to her friend at church as helping attorneys file things. I let her. After all, what did it matter? The only applause I ever truly cared about came from a different room, a courtroom, one I had earned on my own. And yet, part of me still wished they'd ask, just once, just enough to prove I hadn't disappeared completely. 2 years ago, Brenna called me out of the blue. It was the first time I'd heard her voice in over a year. I was in chambers reviewing a sealed case file when my phone lit up with her name. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before answering. "Novely," she said cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. "I need a favor." Of course she did. She'd started a fintech company, something about ethical investment algorithms. It had gained traction, raised millions, and landed her on some 30 under 30 list. Our parents framed the magazine cover. I found out about it when Gwen sent me a screenshot with the caption, "She's still calling herself a genius, huh?" Now, Brenna needed help reviewing a few legal documents. "Just a quick look," she said. "You've always been good at that stuff." I didn't remind her that I was a sitting federal judge. I didn't correct her when she called it my legal hobby. Instead, I agreed because I was curious and because, foolishly, some part of me still wanted her to see me. She sent over a pile of contracts. They were riddled with inconsistencies, loopholes that could have tanked her funding round. I spent 3 weekends going through them, cross-referencing federal compliance codes and annotating every critical flaw. I sent her back a 15-page memo. She didn't reply. A week later, I saw a video clip from her board presentation. She stood before investors, smiling brightly, and said, "I flagged a few structural issues in the contracts. My instincts kicked in, I guess." I watched the applause. I watched her shine, and I felt nothing but ice. I didn't expect public credit, but I did expect a text, a call, something. Instead, she posted about it on LinkedIn. "Trust your gut, especially when the stakes are high." My parents flooded the comments with fire emojis and "so proud of you" reactions. My father sent me an email the next day with a link. Subject line, "See what your sister's doing?" No message, no "how are you?" just a hyperlink to her success. I didn't reply. I didn't mention the memo. I didn't tell them I'd been appointed to oversee part of a federal task force on financial fraud, or that I'd been cited in 3 legal journals in the past year. None of that would have mattered anyway, not to people who had never seen value in anything they couldn't show off at dinner parties. But the worst came 6 months later. I heard murmurs through judicial channels that Brenna's company was under investigation. SEC flags, inflated earnings, misleading investor reports. Her ethical startup was, ironically, a house of cards. At first, I said nothing. I kept my head down, focused on my docket. Then I received a sealed file, preliminary jurisdictional overview, the name Brenna Thatcher in bold on the first page. My stomach turned. I recused myself immediately, filed the conflict of interest form, and sent a private note to my chief judge explaining everything. I expected to be cut off from the case entirely, but instead I was placed on standby as a consulting judge should the case require federal oversight. It was standard practice, but in this case, it felt like a loaded gun waiting to go off. Weeks passed. The case moved forward under state jurisdiction. My name appeared on no public record until it all came crashing down. A jurisdictional gap. Federal fraud statutes invoked. The presiding judge stalled. My phone rang. "You may need to step in," the clerk said quietly. And just like that, I knew my family was about to find out exactly who I'd become, and I didn't owe them a damn thing. The courthouse in Raleigh was stark and cold, all stone and glass and steel, a place built to be unshakable. That morning, the sun barely filtered through the tinted windows as I walked past security without hesitation. No robe, no staff, just me, a plain charcoal suit, and a badge that opened doors most people didn't know existed. I didn't enter through the front. Consulting judges are discreet. We don't draw attention unless necessary. I was instructed to observe from the back gallery and only intervene if jurisdictional issues reached a critical point. It was rare, almost never happened, but that morning it did. Brenna sat at the defense table, flanked by two attorneys in expensive suits. Her hair was perfectly styled, her posture composed. To the untrained eye, she looked confident, but I saw the twitch in her fingers, the tightness in her jaw. She knew the walls were closing in. My parents were seated directly behind her. My mother clutched a pearl necklace that didn't quite match her blouse. My father sat rigid, nodding occasionally like he still believed all of this was beneath them. They hadn't seen me. When a local reporter asked my mother about the case, she smiled like it was all a misunderstanding. "Brenna is our pride," she said. "Our younger daughter? Well, she's more private, not really built for this kind of pressure." I didn't flinch. The prosecution laid out the evidence in chilling order. False financial reports, tampered revenue metrics, private recordings of Brenna promising outlandish returns to investors. One of the jurors visibly recoiled. Then it happened. The lead prosecutor introduced new exhibits, emails crossing state lines, involving wire transfers that triggered federal statutes. Judge Maxwell Lowe's demeanor shifted. He called for a recess. In the hallway, I heard him on the phone with the chief judge. "This is above my authority," he said. "We're into federal territory. I need clearance to request the standby." The clerk appeared minutes later. "You're up," she said quietly. When the court reconvened, the room was tense. Reporters whispered. My parents leaned forward, alert. Judge Lowe stood. "This case now falls under federal jurisdiction," he announced. "We are invoking the presence of a consulting judge pre-cleared for this circuit." Then he turned to the back. "Judge Carter, would you please take the bench?" A wave of silence crushed the room. I rose. My heels clicked against the tile floor with a precise, unhurried rhythm. My mother spun in her seat. My father's mouth parted slightly, eyes narrowed with something between disbelief and recognition. Brenna went pale. I approached the bench. "Yes, Your Honor," I said calmly. "All rise," the bailiff announced, voice firm. The court stood for me. I took my seat behind the elevated desk, the world tilting into a new axis. The file before me was familiar, the case I had tracked silently from the shadows. Now it was mine to adjudicate publicly. "This court now proceeds under federal jurisdiction," I declared. "All previous motions will be reviewed. Let the record reflect the transition." The prosecution continued with renewed force. The defense scrambled, clearly unprepared for the shift. I ruled with clarity, no hesitation, every objection addressed, every reference to federal code delivered with precision. Brenna didn't look at me at first, but during the second recess, she found me in the hallway. Her voice was sharp, almost desperate. "Novalee, how could you do this to me?" I met her eyes, cold and unwavering. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "You built this lie, and now it's falling apart." She stepped closer. "You're supposed to be my sister." "No," I said. "You were supposed to be mine." Behind her, our mother approached. Her voice was brittle, high-pitched. "Novalee, please, you don't understand what this will do to our family." I looked her dead in the eyes. "You were never worried about the family when you erased me." She said nothing. My father stood at a distance, silent, watching for the first time, really seeing me. The verdict came faster than expected. 3 days, that's all it took. The jury deliberated for barely 6 hours before they returned, expressions somber, eyes avoiding Brenna's. I sat at the bench, robe crisp, gavel resting quietly beside me. The room felt like it was holding its breath. "On the count of securities fraud," the foreperson read, "we find the defendant guilty." Brenna didn't flinch, not outwardly, but I saw her throat bob once, like she was swallowing the last of her illusions. "On the count of wire fraud, guilty." My mother made a small choking sound. "On the count of conspiracy to defraud investors, guilty." My father sat like stone. Brenna turned her head slightly, just enough to look at me, not with rage, not with shame, just disbelief, as if somewhere inside her she still believed she was untouchable. But the law doesn't care about family roles, it only cares about facts. I read the sentence as prescribed by statute: minimum term, no bail, pending appeal, a transfer to federal holding. My voice was even, measured, merciless in its neutrality. When the session adjourned, the cameras surged forward, reporters shouting questions, flashes everywhere, but I didn't look at them. I returned to chambers alone, shut the door, let the quiet sink in like a bomb. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. My mother. Her voice trembled through the speaker. "Novalee, we didn't know. We didn't realize. We're sorry." I deleted it before she finished. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. They had decades to ask me who I was, what I was building, who I'd become. They never cared to know until I was sitting above them. Later that night, I met Gwen at a small jazz bar off South Street. She raised her glass before I even sat down. "To Judge Carter," she said with a grin. "Damn, you broke the whole illusion in one move." I didn't smile. "Not yet," I said. "It wasn't about breaking, it was about stepping out of the shadow they left me in." She nodded. "So what now?" I looked around the room. No one knew who I was here. No photographers, no whispers, just a woman in a quiet bar finally free of chasing applause that never mattered. "I build something better," I said. Gwen leaned back, satisfied. That's the version of you they never saw coming. We sat in silence, letting the music fill the space where old wounds used to sit. In the weeks that followed, I declined every interview request. I issued no statement. I let the headlines run their course. Judge revealed as sister of convicted tech CEO. Carter sparks ethics debate. But I didn't read them. I didn't need their validation. I'd already made peace with the only judgment that ever mattered, my own. Then, one Friday afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from Mr. Aldridge. The envelope was faded at the edges, the writing still sharp. "Novalee, I saw the trial. I recognized your voice the moment you ruled on that first objection. You always had it in you. Quiet power, justice that doesn't shout. I'm proud more than I can say. P.S. I still keep that old whiteboard in my garage." I held the letter in both hands for a long time, and then I cried. Not for what was lost, but for what had finally, irrevocably been found. Not recognition, not revenge, but release. A year passed. The case faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals, younger CEOs, louder chaos. But for me, everything had changed. Quietly, irrevocably, I began mentoring. It started with a single law student, Larissa, 23, brilliant, terrified of her own voice. She reminded me of myself. I helped her shape her first argument. She stumbled through it, then nailed the second. By the third, she stood taller. Word spread. Soon, there were 7 women in my chambers every other Friday. Women who'd been overlooked, underestimated, told to smile more or be realistic. I didn't teach them to be louder. I taught them to be precise, strategic, unshakable. We didn't talk about Brenna. She was serving her sentence in West Virginia. Minimum security. I read the quarterly updates like a weather report, impersonal, distant. I didn't feel triumph, only distance, like watching a ship disappear into fog. My parents reached out 3 more times. A letter, a holiday card, a voicemail. I never responded. Some fractures don't need mending. They need to stay broken to protect what's finally whole. On the anniversary of the verdict, I walked the halls of the courthouse alone. The place was quiet. Friday after hours, empty elevators, echoing footsteps. I paused outside courtroom 3, where everything had changed. Then I heard it, a soft voice behind me. "Judge Carter?" I turned. A girl, no more than 16, stood nervously in a school blazer. Her teacher hovered nearby. "I saw your name on the plaque," she said. "You're the one who—" I nodded before she finished. "Yes, I am." She bit her lip. "I want to be a judge one day, but people say I'm too quiet." I smiled gently. "Then let them talk, and you keep building." Her eyes lit up. As she walked away, I stood there for a moment longer. There are no parades for women like me, no statues, just the quiet satisfaction of not disappearing, of turning silence into law, shadows into foundation. They once called me invisible, but now when I speak, rooms rise.